Hi everyone, I am Dr. T and this is the first of many videos I will be doing that will be combining two of my favorite things, makeup and talking about mental health. I first started doing these as Instagram lives, but then it got a little too much for me. The lives were a bit distracting, people like coming in and out and commenting, and I feel like this is a lot more easier for me and a lot more easier for me to be vulnerable. And that was one of my goals this year, was to be very vulnerable with the people that I want to speak to, the people that I want to reach out to, and just to build an audience where I can kind of be myself with and talk about mental health and talk about makeup and talk about all the things in between. But this is the first video. I'm a bit nervous, but like all things, it's important to just get started and see what happens and see where this goes. I'm really excited. So today's topic is going to be about grief. I wanted to do this before the holidays because as we all aware, we're in a global pandemic and it's just hard. It's hard. Like there's a lot of people that are grieving, and it's not just grieving death. It could be grieving the loss of a relationship. It could be grieving, you know, many people lost their jobs because of COVID. So you could be grieving, like missing being around your coworkers, or maybe you left your job and it might have been the best job, but you're still grieving that the time you had there. Maybe you were there for many years. It was time for you to go, but it was hard to leave still because it's different. So grief for me always represents a time of transition. This really video that I want to do is focused on how to grieve while also working, because I think that one of the things I always say as a grief therapist is what makes grief really hard sometimes is the fact that when you're grieving, when you're grieving, the world doesn't stop. It's like people will say sorry in the beginning and they'll mean well and they'll offer help, they'll offer everything. But after the funeral, people stop coming by, people stop checking in, and then you're left to deal with it alone. And I always say that's one of the hardest things to deal with, because while people will mean well, they sometimes don't understand. And what's sometimes worse is if your family's not understanding, then neither is your employer. So after all the bereavement days are used up, especially working at a school, it's like, all right, well, you got to come back to work. I always tell people that's the part that you have to prepare for, the part where people continue on and it's almost like they forget you're grieving. And then there's the grief where it's happening slowly, and it's like, how do I compartmentalize? How do I continue in this space? How do I come to work every day knowing that I have a sick person at home? My special person, the person I love, is home sick, going through this, and I'm expected to work. And you get so good at it after a while that you don't even feel like you're grieving anymore. And I think that's very hard for some people. So let's get into it. First, I already did my eyebrows because sometimes the eyebrows can be like the hardest. So I'm going to be putting some concealer on here, and then we're going to be choosing some eyeshadows as I talk to you guys about grief. First makeup tip, I usually put concealer on my eyes so that the eyeshadow can last a little bit longer. All right, just putting them here. As you can, the eyelashes I have I actually have them put in. These are fake, but they're not the strips. These are eyelash extensions, just FYI for anybody looking, because I used to put eyelashes on And then I got a little bit annoyed. I was like, I don't feel like doing this. And I like the look of having eyelashes every day. I do have to get them refilled, but we're going to make do. All right. So let's get into it. First, let me just choose my colors so that I can really kind of talk about grief. And as I said before, for some people, it's like as I said before, grief really just, to me, represents more than loss, because loss implies that things can be found again. It's more than that to me. Grief is really, to me, essentially transitioning it without the one thing, having to live in transition without the one thing that you really desired the most, someone that you love, or something that you had that you don't have anymore, and that's not coming back. I think that's what makes the grief really intense, is that that person or that loved one, that thing is not coming back. There's hope lost. Usually when there's prospect of something coming back, you don't feel as down. But when you're grieving someone or something or some event, it's really implied that that is not coming back to you. So how do we deal? Do you go to therapy immediately? How do you process grief and still try to manage and carry on with life, as that example that I gave before? I would say that first you kind of have to sit with it. There's some people are like, just like, you got to go into therapy like right now, like, talk to someone immediately. And that doesn't necessarily have to be the case. Sometimes it's okay to just sit with it and say, this thing happened to me, or process the shock that comes with it. Like, this really happened. And some people don't want to talk about it right away. So if you do see someone grieving and you're like in the death or an event happened, the immediate response is, well, what can I do? And who can you talk to? And like, you mobilize to get all these things. But I think the best way is to kind of be present. When you're trying to mobilize and get things done and get people the resources they need and get all these things in place, sometimes the person that's grieving just needs a minute to breathe, because death can sometimes feel like someone is literally ripping the air that you're breathing and it's suffocating. I know that's a graphic way of putting it, but it's like, for some people, the person that died was their breath of fresh air. So when I say that people need time to breathe, they need time to sit with what happened. And that can be hard if someone's in their face kind of going, well, let's get you to see a therapist. And it's okay to see a therapist. I'm a therapist that specializes in grief, but sometimes I'm always telling people, like, just process what you have to process, and then we can come. Because if you come to therapy when you're not ready, you're just sitting there looking at me and I'm looking at you, and you're just like, I'm not ready to be here. And that's okay. Sometimes you're not ready for therapy. Sometimes you need to take time to process, catch your breath, and then come to therapy. And I think that's something that people have to understand, especially with grief. And you might be rushing that person off to go talk to a stranger. Well, really, that person may want to talk to you. Like, it's like, okay, you can talk to your therapist about this, but can I also talk to you about this, since you are my friend, since you are my family member? You don't have to rush me off to talk to somebody that I don't know. So it can be seen as very insensitive when you have a person who's grieving and you're just kind of trying to push them off to someone and just saying, like, talk to somebody else about this. Like, we can talk about this later. Okay. So let me put a pin on this real quick, because as much as I love multitasking, I'm not the best at it. So right now I'm just gonna put some eyeshadow. I'm kind of going for a wintery, smoky kind of look. So I'm just applying some eyeshadow here. Just gonna take a nice quick break from it so that I can kind of process and do both. Okay, I'm gonna put some on this eye. So I put the concealer there so that this can kind of really pop out. I'm going to be going very simple. I'm not trying to do too much. I know some people like to do too much, but that's just not really my style. I like to do kind of more natural looks. I mean, I'm doing a smoky, I talk about natural. I like to just do, there are a lot of people who do a lot of complex looks, and I'm very simple. Because I feel like makeup can be simple. If you want to do something, I'm going out to dinner, so I'm not trying to do a whole full kind of craze thing. I'm just trying to ease into it. So I'm just applying this all over my eye, and then I'm going to clean it up a little bit, as you can see afterwards. Okay. Now I meant to show you. Juvia's Place. It's actually one of my favorite eyeshadows because I just like the way that it sits on my face. It's also a black owned company. This is called the Nubian Royal. It's one of my favorites. I just really I like deep colors, but I also like colors that give you a little sparkle. So now I'm going to put a little sparkle, and then we're going to jump back into the conversation of how to really help someone who's grieving and how to also help yourself that's grieving, and then going back to the topic at hand, which is work. Okay, yep. So, I'm gonna put this at the bottom. I like to put my eyeshadow first because then I like to clean everything up afterwards. So I'm just putting a little shimmer on the lid. As I said before, everybody does makeup very differently. I mean, the outcome is still the same, but me personally, this is how I kind of like to do it. I know that some people put extra layers, but I find that you really don't need that much. Once you put the concealer, as you can see, it will stand out. You don't really need all that much. Okay. Oh, I like this. Just put a little sparkle at the bottom. As I said before, I'm going to do. And then I like to clean it up with. So now we're going to kind of go back. So like I said, I paused where I said sometimes it can be very insensitive when you're mobilizing to say to someone like, go out and talk to someone. And I feel that often happens when you're working too. It's like, how do I kind of tell my coworkers to back off? Because one, they're not family, they're not friends, they're your coworkers. And sometimes like it could be the same thing over and over again. Like, especially if you're dealing with a large company and the word gets out that you're grieving, people are saying sorry. People might be giving you flowers. People might be talking to you about it over and over again. So I think for you, if you are grieving and you are going to work, or you're returning from the funeral, or you're returning from bereavement leave, it's very important to set boundaries as soon as you return to work. That was the number one thing for me to do was say, who do I feel comfortable speaking to this about? And if someone that I don't feel comfortable speaking about my special person, who I'll get into a little bit, I have to kind of say to myself, like, I'm not ready to talk about this with you. Like, I feel more comfortable just sitting with it and being by myself. So it's very, very important. And I learned this the hard way. It's just like, if you're not ready to talk about grief, you're not ready to talk about it, especially at work. And it's very important to protect your mental health at work, because the moment that you become overwhelmed with this grief, with this sadness, with this anger at work, it may affect your ability to do just that, work. So setting boundaries could look like many different things. Setting boundaries could look like, you know what, I really don't feel like talking about this right now, or just like not the time and place. When I'm ready to talk about it with you, I will. Or I just don't feel comfortable, or I'm just trying to get through the day, or I'm just trying to get through my work. It's very important to just tell people where you're at and just to say, I need this time to myself. It is more than okay to tell people that. It's crucial. Oftentimes we're not setting boundaries. I mean, people are well-meaning at work. I'm not gonna lie. Like, it's very nice that people might give you edible arrangements. It's very nice that people will stop and say, "I want to take the time out to make sure that you're good." But at the same time, it can be very overwhelming. You're trying to do the work. People you don't know and don't feel comfortable talking to about someone that you've loved, you don't really know them that well, it's okay to just say, I don't feel comfortable. And people should understand. And if they don't, that's their problem, really. So now I'm just going to put this on top. I'm like all sparkles everywhere. I just like to put this in the brow line. And then I'm going to kind of blend in a darker color into it. So this will be interesting. There's stages of makeup and then there's stages of grief. And to be honest with you, everyone goes through the stages in different parts. Everyone does everything very differently and with makeup, and everybody grieves differently. We don't go through all these stages like everyone says. Like, it's not like anger, this, bargaining, denial. Everybody's different. Some people stay in stages longer than others. Some people don't even go through the certain stages. It's very different for everybody because grief can be very different for people. There could be traumatic grief where you weren't expecting it. There can be complex grief where it's multiple deaths happening in the same year, sometimes within months of each other. There can be the grief that's slow, which is what I experienced with my grandfather, who I shared a very special relationship with. It was very slow, and I saw him deteriorate over a period of time. And as he was grieving the loss of his body functions, like all these things are shutting down on me, I'm grieving the man that I once knew, that was standing tall, that took me out to museums and took me to libraries and drove me around everywhere. And I've seen him kind of shrink, and seeing him shrink that way made me feel a way because I felt that so intensely. So if we're all experiencing these different types of grief, then we're all not going to go through the stages at the same time. Yeah, so that's a very important point to note, that there are different stages of grief, and there are probably different stages that people haven't even thought of yet. All right, I'm going to just put this on the end here. I like this brush because it just brings everything all together. All right, as I said, I'm not trying to go crazy. But I'm just trying to go simple. It is a dinner. And this is, I really like this right here because it is the lip bar, just a tint, 3-in-1 tinted skin conditioner. I like that it has SPF. And I just really like how it sits on my face. So I'm going to put this. As I said, some people will even put their foundation first, and then they put the eyeshadow. But like I said, I like cleaning everything up at the end. You'll see, I probably do things different from your favorite influencer, but this is more real. At least in my opinion. Oh, definitely more real because I forgot my eyeliner. So let me go ahead and put my eyeliner in. I like to put on the waterline, not too much. I don't like to go too crazy. Just wanted to give it a nice little effect. And then I use my brush to kind of put my foundation. So we talked about stages, we talked about different types of grief. And we also talked about setting boundaries, especially at work. And also to set boundaries with the employer. I know this from working in a school. It is really frustrating when people assign you days for bereavement, when they say this is the worst part, when they categorize like you get more days if it's immediate family, and you get less days if it's like, if it's like your uncle, like, or if it's like a friend or a family friend. And it just minimizes, in my opinion, minimizes, because you might not be close to an immediate family member, but you might be closer to the family and friend that you grew up with for years. And maybe they passed from whatever happened in the pandemic, and that person meant so much to you because they grew up with you. But your job is saying, no, for that person, because they're not really blood related, you only get 1 day. I think that's the most frustrating part, is having people tell you how many days we're going to assign to you for grieving based on the relation they had with you. That frustrates me the most. There have been times where I have to tell my dad I'm not ready to come back. I mean, I've had, when COVID first started, it was really hard for me because people that were passing away were not my immediate family, but they were people that grew up with my immediate family. And I've had to tell my employer, like, no, I cannot come into work. I cannot focus. People are dying around me, and yes, they may not be blood related, but they're people that I grew up with. They're like my family. I get so annoyed. So if you are ever looking for a new job, I think it's very important to just think about that too, especially in the times that we're in now, is to really make sure that you understand not only their sick policy, their sick time, vacation time, but the bereavement time. Are they putting a time limit on that? So now I'm going in with the concealer. I know everyone does it kind of differently, but for me, this is how I'm doing it. I like to put some here, and then I'm going to put a powder based. I know you might be saying you do it differently from everybody else, but everyone has a different style, and it's really just, this is what works for me. This is what really kind of cleans things up for me. And I'll say to you too, the same thing with grief. Everybody grieves differently in their own way, and they have every right to, just like you have every right to. I put it under my eyes because it cleans up all the eyeshadow. Okay, and then I do a little tap up here, kind of brighten up the forehead. I'm definitely gonna do a little better job blending because this is a blending brush that I use for my concealer. I don't really like using my fingers because I don't like it to get messy. I'm not a messy person. I don't like eating messy wings. I eat like boneless wings. So I have to pick up my fork because I hate having mess on my hands. So you'll never really see me blend anything with my hands. I really don't like it. All right, so I do blush. I do foundation a little bit different. Ooh. Where did I put it? Oh, here it is. So, I'm sorry, I meant to say contour. I use this for contour, really like it. It's very simple. I kind of go in with this. This is something I got from, I'm trying to remember, maybe Revlon. I really like the bottom of it because sometimes I use it for eyeshadow. I use this part for the blush, I'm blanking. And this part I use for contour. So I just go in and I put it. And I really just like how it sits on my face better than having to use, like some people use concealer, some people use like other companies liquid base, but I like the powder base because it just blends with my face much better. And I put it at the top. I'm gonna blend everything afterwards. Okay, and just put some on my nose. I don't put too much because again, I don't want it to show too much, but that's why I like the powder base. I got that from MAC, and I'm just gonna go in with this brush again and really blend it all together, even at the top. So I kind of just dust it really. I just like kind of let it sit on my face for a little bit. And then I go in with the setting. And I'm going to let this sit on my face. And as we kind of talk about the last tip I want to leave you with in terms of grieving, and this is probably the most important point of all the video, really. So this setting powder I got from Juvia's Place. All my makeup was from Juvia's Place. So I really like how everything sits on my face. And so I'm just kind of putting this on my cheeks, letting my face bake for a little bit. And then I'm going to go in and put highlighter and blush. And then we're going to be all set. Like I said, I don't like to spend a lot of time on my makeup. I like to make it clean, simple, and something that makes sense to me. And then you'll find your own way. All right, so the last thing that I want to leave with you before I put on, as I'm putting on my blush, is that there is no competition with grief. Oftentimes I'll hear people say, well, you know, it's not, I'm grieving, but it's not as bad as this other person. Like, their person died this way, so it must be worse. And I think we shouldn't really get caught up with it. Your grief is your grief. You don't have to compare yourself to anyone else. Juvia's Place. You don't have to compare your grief to anybody else's. If you're grieving, you're grieving. And it's okay. It's okay. I might have put a little bit too much on this side, but it's okay. It's okay to grieve. And it's okay if it's your grief. I often find that it sometimes will experience this a lot when people are talking about the death of their grandparents. People will say, oh, you know, they lived a long life. And I heard that a lot when my grandmother passed, when my grandfather passed. Well, yeah, my grandmother and my grandfather passed. My grandfather more recently in October of last year. I found it incredibly insulting. Because I was like, that's great. I know my grandfather lived a long life. It's wonderful that he lived as long as that he did live. But that's not what I'm essentially grieving. For me, my grandfather was one of the closest people to me on this earth. I'm grieving his memories, our memories. I'm grieving the pain that he had to suffer. I'm experiencing sadness because I saw him. I saw him in his final moments, and it was painful to watch. I'm sad because he had to go out that way. I'm sad because he was very special to me, regardless of his age. Even if he was 130, I would still cry because I'm mourning the person that knew me the best, that gave me so much. So I always tell people, doesn't matter. There's no need to compare. There's no need to justify anything. There's no need to say everything happens for a reason. It's grief. It's sadness. It's sadness that eventually turns into love. I think that grief is transition, but it also means love. I grieve, and it represents how intensely I loved this person. And for somebody to come in and kind of just say, well, you know, like, it's okay to be sad. You know, he was, you know, just be happy that you got to spend the time with you. There's nothing happy about grief in the beginning, and no one should ever force you to feel like there is. I'm sorry. Let people grieve. Let people cry. Let people, no matter how old the person is, no matter what way, even if they died in their sleep peacefully, that's great. It doesn't take away the sadness. Whatever you say does not take away the sadness. And you don't have to justify anyone's grief. It doesn't help. So that's where I leave you with, especially if people try to justify anything with you at work, in your family, in your personal life. Tell people I'm still sad. I love this person deeply and I'm grieving deeply. All right. That came out better than expected. I am looking for my spray and I don't see it. Oh, it's on the floor. Sorry, guys. All right, let me just spray my face. Leave you with the final growth tip is that there's no competition with grief. Set boundaries at work when you return. If you're looking for new employment, make sure you ask about bereavement time because these things happen and you want to know where your job falls in terms of how they rank and how much they care about their employees. If they're telling you that they only give you 5 days to grieve your immediate family, you gotta go. It's not worth it. Or don't take the job. And just know that grief is transition. Being able to transition into another phase of your life with something that you once had, but you will no longer have. And then it transitions into love. Transitions to all the memories that you've had and all the love that you've had. And then I don't even think there's really a cure. I don't think there's a cure for grief. I think it's one of those things that stays with you and just occupies less space in your brain, but it still represents something that happened to you. So I always look at grief as a transitional period, and I also look at grief as love. It's a painful love that eventually turns into less painful love, that eventually turns into memories, beautiful memories that keep you warm at night. So I hope you enjoyed our first episode of Makeup and Mental Health, or Active Vanity with Dr.T. I will have a little things more organized next time, but I just want to get this off and ready to go for 2022. So I wish you guys all the best and Happy New Year. And I can't wait for y'all to see what I have in store.